Hi folks, Steve here, and let's talk through The Silencers, Margot Nash's sort of autobiographical documentary. The Silencers, of course, being about those silences that families share. And what is really interesting about this image is the way that it seems like a sort of a nice family portrait of um, what could be certainly a family at the beach on holiday. And this film is very much about family, but it's actually about sort of the darker elements of family and the personalities of family um, that you know is sort of present in many families. So the real question about the film is whose story is this? And whose story is Margot Nash actually trying to tell? Is she telling the father's story? Is she telling the mother's story? And I mean, in a way, she does tell their stories, um, but she also tells her story. And I think what's interesting about the way that she narrativizes the father's story and the mother's story is she's not telling it from their point of view. She's actually talking about her own experiences, right? Her own experiences of being in the house with these two highly volatile people. Um, so the question of ethics here is what responsibility did Nash have in the telling of their story being the father and the mother, right? Um, and I think what's interesting is by talking about her experiences, she's essentially making a film that tells her story. So the family photographs appear across the film, and they're actually crucial in the telling of this story. So think about what role do the photographs play in the telling of this film, right? And also, how do they substitute for talking heads? Across the film, we've seen a number of movies where you've actually got talking heads. You've actually got interviews with people, right? In this film, you don't have the talking heads at all. What you have is some audio um, that was recorded of the parents, and you really have this extremely heavy voiceover, right? Which is by Margot. I mean, I'll talk about the modes in a sec, but I think that's really interesting in the way that she's talking directly to the photographs, and um, she's not just describing what you see in the photograph. She's actually interpreting the photograph. So think about that also when you're watching it. The Silences is about awareness and lack of awareness, and it's certainly about Margot thinking she's aware of certain things in the house when she's a child and the lack of awareness that she had with other things in the house. Again, that's something else that the film really works through, and I think the film does really well in discussing that. Um, now, the parents are, um, you know, an odd, you could say they're odd, peculiar people with their own problems, right? And it would be very easy for a daughter to grow up feeling unloved in this house. And Margot makes it very clear that she feels like she did actually grow up sort of feeling quite unloved, certainly by her mother. What's interesting is that she doesn't demonize her parents. And in fact, she spends considerable time painting a picture of their lives, their desires, their frustrations, right? So ethically, you could say that she actually does her due diligence in depicting these people and also depicting, um, you know, the more positive, interesting things about them rather than just her own negative experiences. Right, but that being said, neither does she attempt to shape a simple positive message from her experiences. This isn't a feel-good film where it's, this was my childhood, but let's all, sing happy songs about being a kid. It wasn't like that for Margot, and I think that's really important as well. So this is a quote by Kit McFarlane. Kit, of of course, wrote the reading that accompanies the silences for this week. And this is her quote: "It may be reductive to refer to the silences simply as a film about mental illness, but the documentary coincides with some hopefully ongoing, albeit shaky, steps in the media and in politics towards increased awareness about the discussion of mental health in society." Now, what does she actually mean by that? It may be reductive to refer to the silences simply as a film about mental illness. And I think what's going on here is this film is actually about Margot, right? And it's not about her father who suffered from significant mental health problems, right? So to say that the film is about mental health would actually be giving only one aspect of the film. The film is actually about a number of other aspects. So think about that when you're watching the film. How the film is, it's sort of it keeps referring to aspects of mental health, but the film itself isn't about mental illness. So if this film was to be picked up and sort of to become kind of the poster for good films about mental illness, would that actually be a mistruth in what the film is really about? So when you're watching it, really think, what is this film really about? What is actually going on screen here? Now, for the most part, the silences avoids making those broad positive statements. So there's little attempt to persuade the viewer that the story being presented will have larger cultural ramifications, or that the characters involved are particularly emblematic of society at large. Now, I'll sort of get back to this in a sec, but how is or isn't this ethical, right? In the fact that it's telling a very personal story, but it's not at any point trying to connect itself with the broader world. And there have been, there have been other more recent films which have also been accused of that. Um, you know, the recent film "This Is Not a Film" being another film, which tells the story of, the director in Iran and sort of trapped in his house, and it never actually tries to connect that with the broader world or the broader society at large. And this is a similar problem film where it's actually representing, a very personal story, but doesn't actually try and connect it on a broader level. Now, the experiences of the film are Nash's or her interpretations of other experiences, and her narration keeps the immediacy of the context grounded and focused. So the heavy voiceover of Nash, think of why that's there, and the importance of that being there, in that this film being kind of a personal diary entry almost. Now, the silences can arguably be criticised for not providing a particularly practical outcome for the personal story. So, this is Kit McFarlane's criticism also, and what people mean by this is it's telling this personal story, right? But it doesn't actually give you a reason or a context for that story. It doesn't give you a broader context. It doesn't give you a practical outcome for the personal story. So all you actually get in this film is a personal story. So think about whether that's a problem. Now, this would be a question of how the personal narrative can be abstracted and generalized for broader application, right? Is there something in this film that can actually be personalized for broader application? And also, just a question to think about is, how can the intensely personal be made to inform larger questions and problems? And is that something lacking in the film, or does it do a really good job in saying that here is a family that on the outside looked like a very normal family, but actually on the inside were far from normal, if normal can even be categorized? So the reenactments, there are kind of reenactments in the film, which again is worth having a think about. The Silences is literally filled with clips from Nash's earlier films, right? For her earlier fiction films, and it should be stated they are fiction films. Now, what we kind of see in these films is when Nash is talking about, say, her father, right? We actually cut to an earlier scene of a father being very abusive, or mentally abusive, more than anything, with his family members. And these characters from her earlier films, they become kind of fictional surrogates for the historical reality, right? This effect is beguiling and also perhaps intriguingly misleading because if you look at those films are not telling Margot Nash's story. They're not autobiographical in the way that The Silence is autobiographical, right? So what she's actually doing is she's taking particular scenes from her earlier films and saying, well, here is my narrative and here are the scenes to emphasize that narrative. But is that misleading? Because those films weren't actually Margot Nash's own personal stories. So the reenactments, in a way, are being interpreted, but are they kind of false in what they're actually doing in this film? So just some conventions, expository conventions. I just want to concentrate on a couple of aspects of the expository mode. Um, you've got a very, very strong voiceover. It addresses the audience directly and very intimately. It attempts to persuade the audience of a particular point of view. When you're watching, think what that point of view actually is. The film never ever tries to say, well, maybe you could think of her mother and actually not agree with Margot. There's never any chance of doing that. The whole film, you're always going to agree with Margot's side. She's the voiceover, she's the voice of the film, and she controls the narrative. Reflexive conventions. I mean, again, the reenactments from her earlier films. Like, it doesn't just borrow techniques from fiction films. It actually shows you, scenes from fiction films within it, which I think is really, really interesting on what's actually going on there. And absolutely the performative conventions. So think about other films that we've seen in the course where the director is, is heard, is on screen. In this film, you actually have Margot in photographs, in audio, actually on camera. Certainly in the last third of the film, she is on camera and her voice just dominates. So think about her director as performer, director as star, director as auteur, okay? And this film is absolutely within that tradition, right? So the way that she interacts with the images, the way that she comments on the process of making this documentary, and also the way that her sister is represented across the film is also really interesting. And just a final thought: how do you feel about Eileen by the end? And how does the film want you to feel about Eileen? Now, Eileen doesn't appear in this film. Of course, I'm talking about Eileen Wuornos. But when you watch a film like Life and Death of a Serial Killer with Eileen Wuornos, it's very easy to say, how do you feel about Eileen by the end and how does the film want you to feel? Think about that in relation to Margot Nash, right? The director, the star of the film. How do you feel about her by the end and how does the film want you to feel? And when you think about that, think about a film like Eileen, Life and Death of a Serial Killer, and think about the interesting connection between, say, those two films, and also Nick Broomfield as an on-screen star director, and also Margot Nash. Anna Bronski's quote, which sort of become quite famous across this course, is the art of a good documentary portrait is to gain your subject's trust and then betray them. Whose trust does she whose trust does she betray? Does she betray anybody's trust? Whose trust does she gain? And you could actually ask some questions about her sister in this film and the way that she didn't want to become heavily involved in the film. She actually wanted Margot not to show the film in New Zealand, and Margot agreed, so the film was never actually released in New Zealand. So there's some interesting things going on there. But the sister, as Margot has discussed, did feel very uncomfortable with this film and this film being made. So is there any trust being portrayed, and is the story told ethically? All right, I'll leave it there. I think The Silence is a fantastic film. It's a really interesting film for this course to think about the ethics going on in the film and the way that the filmmaker is trying to tell her own story, but she's actually talking about people who are dead and people who don't actually have a right of reply and the ethical problems around that. All right, I'll leave it there. See you in the class. Bye for now.